Right, good evening everybody. Welcome to this meeting of Community Environment and Partnerships. There are no fire alarms scheduled for this evening, so if the fire alarm sounds, please evacuate the building immediately. The fire exit is located at the rear of this room. Go down the stairs and meet in the War Memorial Park. Please note the meeting is being webcast live on the internet. I'm told it's working. The webcast will also be published to YouTube after the meeting. Mobile phones, please can everybody switch their phones off or turn them to silent. We have no apologies for absence or substitutions. Declarations of interest. Councillor
Yes, it's not pecuniary interest, but in item 3.3 there's a reference to YPI counselling, which I'm the Chief Executive of, so just wanted to declare that.
Any other declarations of interest? Good. There are no urgent matters, and there are no minutes because it's too brief a period after the last meeting, so we'll get probably two lots at our December meeting. Which brings us straight on to item 5, Brighter Futures 2050, a draft vision for children, young people and their families partnership in the borough. So we have Councillor Bound with us, who's going to speak first, and then we've got Eddie Zwara, who's going to give us a presentation, and Jane, I always get your name the right way around, Rawlins Matthias, which bit comes first, who's here to answer the tricky questions, I think. So, and there's a video as well. So, and a guest speaker, a visiting councillor who wants to have his say. What would be the best point for that? Do you want to come after all the presentations and things? Okay, after the presentation. Thanks. Anyway, Councillor Bound.
Thank you very much, Chair. Very brief introduction from me. It's quite self-explanatory as far as the document for the vision is concerned. It's just worth putting it into context that it is a draft vision. It's a vision of the BASP, which is the Basingstoke Area Strategic Partnership. For those members that aren't particularly aware of the work of BASP, we've also got in the documentation in front of us just an identification of the strands of work that it carries out. So there may be some questions, because it often comes up, well, you know, where does this fit into this strand? And it might be that it appears in another strand. So we're very much focused on children, young people and families on this session, but it might be something that if it's about crime and disorder, say, that it might appear in, say, for North Hampshire as a strand. So we're just sort of keeping that in mind when we're going through the detail. What clearly we've got in front of us is the vision. It's got our priorities. We've just finished a period of consultation that ended on Sunday, so that we can then firm up on the vision and the priorities. And of course, we've also got what the priorities are and what some of the themes are under those priorities, what we know about where we're at, where we believe we need to be as far as the BASP partnership and how we're going to get there. And Ed's really going to take us through all of that in detail. And then we can go through taking any feedback that people have got and comments. I think that probably the biggest key for us is in the report, you've got some of the things that we're working on as a local authority, but of course there's a majority of what we're talking about as far as the work, which is actually something that's going to be been done through our partners. And of course, it's worth remembering in BASP, we've got partners that are statutory authorities, voluntary organisations, some large businesses and employers, but really a mix of everybody that has an interest in our place. So it really is very much working in partnership through the BASP partnership. But apart from that, I'll hand over to Ed, who can just take us through the vision, the priorities and some of the detail.
Thank you. Good evening, committee. So, as we said, I'm Ed Iswara. I'm the Children, Young People and Families Team Leader, and this is Jane to my side. So we've come here today to present the draft Brighter Futures 2050 vision. As Councillor Bound has said, this is a partnership vision and it is being led by the Basingstoke Area Strategic Partnership, and that we are one of those partners involved in the design of that. Thank you. Let's come up. So in the document, you've got 2.3 and 2.4. 2.3 is the vision, and it is to create brighter futures for children, young people and their families in Basingstoke and Dean. It's a very broad and encompassing vision, which hopefully catches all, and that's the way that the partners through the development wanted to go. Which lead us into the priorities, and through extensive engagement with our stakeholders, we came and drilled down to those being safe, happy and well, and getting great opportunities to learn, making the most of their talents and having positive aspirations for their future. And feedback about the vision and priorities has been really positive to date. We've received some really helpful comments, and this meeting is part of that consultation process. We aim to take away your comments to inform the final version of the vision document, which will then be adopted by the BASP on the 6th of December, and it will then be endorsed by Cabinet on the 14th of January. Following this meeting this evening, it will also be sent out to members for comment as well. So that's our vision and priorities, and I think my presentation is really about what we've been enabling our community so far to do. And with the introduction of the new Children, Young People and Families team, we had the challenge and the task of really looking into what is being delivered already, and what we can do to enable our communities to take more of a lead in some of that service delivery. So I've got a few slides that I'd like to go through on that, followed by, as said, a video at the end. One of those initiatives is we have a Think Safe event. It's a partnership event to raise awareness of safety to Year 6 pupils. The event had 1,880 young people attend this year, and that was from 40 primary schools across the borough. The event had 8 different scenarios, which some of those were Hampshire Fire and Rescue, who done fire safety. We had Councillor Bound in the Sainsbury's lorry up there in the picture. And that was about road safety. We also had the U-Trust doing healthy relationships, and we had a couple of new additions this year, which was Network Rail offering railway safety. We also had the dog wardens. Unfortunately, we couldn't have a real dog, so we've got a puppet instead. It went down well still. And we also had first aid, which was a new addition. And the event received really positive feedback. All the young people involved and their teachers really enjoyed it. But there is one thing I would like to share with you this evening, and that was a piece of feedback which really summed up the event and summed up exactly what, as a partnership, we've been trying to do. Parent of child A. There are no names mentioned in this. My daughter attended one of these events with her school. A few days later, she was at the park with her dad, who had what we know to be an epileptic fit. Her dad didn't have any form of epilepsy before this. My daughter was able to stay calm, call the emergency services, give all the information needed, and then call me at work. She said she was able to do this because of her learning at Think Safe. So thankful that our borough put this out there for the Year 6 children, and so proud of my girl. And I thought that was an amazing summary of that event. We then move on to an initiative that we wanted to do for the summer, and that was about creating a more sustainable and accessible play opportunities to our children and families. And this was across Basingstoke and Dean. And just to mention that previously activities for children and families was previously limited, and we run this scheme to try and increase that. So the summer pilot saw 6 play day events run across the borough. These were delivered by the Viables Community Centre, Testbourne Community School, Westside Community Centre, Popley Fields Community Centre, the Fieldgate Centre, and another edition which was self-funded, which was by the Basingstoke Model Boat Club down at East Rock Park. The approximate attendance at the play day events was 2,265. They are only approximate. We also saw 4 centres offering sessions throughout the summer holidays, and that was during the weekdays, and they delivered a total of 138 play sessions, and offered sessions such as messy play, treasure hunts, teddy bear picnics, junk modelling, water play, drama and story times, with the emphasis to ensure that families were able to play with their children and children were able to play with other children as well as their families. Total number that attended that was 1,608, which was a increase on last year's play schemes by almost 100%. On top of that, two centres which we really encouraged was around the community centres being able to work together in a joined up way, and two of those centres managed to achieve that, where they provided a subsidised day trip to the Alice Holt Country Park, where 69 tickets were sold, and they had an absolute great time. But it also enabled our families from Basingstoke who can't normally get on public transport or have the access to be able to attend some of these country parks to have that opportunity. So it was a great addition to the Summer of Play. On top of this, some of those centres continue to provide activities during the half term that we've recently had. It wasn't a condition that we asked them to do, but they felt, due to the success of the summer, they felt that they had created a bit of sustainability and also had that ability to then put on additional activities. So, for example, the Viables Community Centre run a treasure hunt, and they had 110 children attend that. And what it also done is it brought children and families from other areas to come and access centres that they wouldn't necessarily attend, but also give the centres an opportunity to promote what they had on offer, creating that sustainability model. The next item, hopefully committee members have heard of this, it's the Summer Streets programme. It's a programme where we engage with young people between the age of 10 and 17, and we provide a range of activities and opportunities that our participants find enjoyable and fun, whilst hopefully contributing to the reduction of antisocial behaviour. This summer we engaged with, or the community's engaged with, 1,510 young people across the borough. We had 8 youth provisions participate in that, and they provided a range of activities from football, rugby, basketball, to first aid, to Tesco's doing food tasting, dancing, cooking sessions, and Slithers and Wriggles, which was a live animals experience. Again, all youth provisions had great feedback from the young people. It was noticed that the clubs also had more visits on these nights from young people who came specifically to try out these new opportunities. I must also point out that we changed our marketing stance on that. Instead of doing individual flyers for each community provision, we actually produced one flyer, which was a booklet, and showcased all the various activities on one page that was happening across the borough, which enabled young people to then select which activities they wanted to go to, and not just receiving one flyer for their own local facility. And it actually allowed young people to attend other centres that they wouldn't normally attend, which was great to see. Again, without any of this, it has to be a partnership approach, and without those centres participating and delivering this, we wouldn't have been able to get the statistics that we've got now, which is around antisocial behaviour, where for the first time in 2 years it has decreased by 44%. That's 101 compared to last year's overall youth-related antisocial behaviour, which was 230. The overall total for 2018 was 129. I come to my last slide before the video, and it's just to briefly mention Halloween Streets, which has recently taken place. We had 2 new additions to that, bringing us to the total of 9. That was Kingsclear and Buckskin. I currently haven't got the statistics of how many young people attended yet, or the feedback, because we're still awaiting our reports for that. But in addition to the various activities that they provided during Halloween, as a partnership, we had one more trick up our sleeve, excuse the pun. The Anvil Arts funded a media project to enable young people to take part in a video, learning all the skills that were needed to create the film, from costume design, makeup, to the actual green screen itself. This was a partnership approach between Anvil Arts, 7 Stream Media, Popley Fields Community Centre, BCOT, various charity shops, and all of the youth projects involved. We had 24 young people attend from across the borough. We also had a young person who won the filming competition, which was running throughout the Summer Streets programme, and that young person attended the Halloween filming shoot to learn the behind the scenes and actually help produce, well, particularly one of the videos that the video I'm about to show you. So without further ado, I'd like to show you this video, and hopefully technology will work. And here we go. We just have no sound. There's no sound. I can't. Oh no, it worked earlier. Oh, maybe. You're going to have to imagine what it sounds like. It's just some music. I'll do some commentary, how about that? That was a young person just explaining what they'd done for the day. They made costumes where the charity shops had donated lots of clothes, and they used, well, there's a young lady there cutting up clothes there, putting fake blood on, and we had BCOT students come in to help them with their makeup and doing their hair. These two here are saying how much they're enjoying themselves and what new skills that they're learning, and the fact that they never thought that they would be able to achieve what they have achieved so far. This is them learning the moves to the Thriller video, which of course is the Michael Jackson music video. This is one of our colleagues saying that the young person accidentally sprayed their hair green, and of course on a green screen green doesn't show up, so his hair disappeared. This is a chap from 7th Street Media just proving that theory, to say that if you wear green it disappears. These are the BCOT students doing the makeup. That's the green screen, and the screen that you just saw before was what would happen. That's our young chap who won the filming competition. That is my colleague Rachel dancing in the corner, trying to get them to copy. And this is where the magic happens. And of course you can change the scenery. You can put anything on a green screen. And they had enough time to be able to go out into the Popley Fields woods and do another scene there. And this young lady's just saying how much she really enjoyed the day, and the fact that she was able to dress up as a werewolf. And she didn't get paint on her face, it was only on her hands. These two, again, saying how much they enjoyed themselves, and they didn't think that they could do it when they first turned up because they were really nervous. But now they feel confident, and then they said a Mary Poppins quote, and I'm not going to repeat that because I can't say it. And that was the end of the film. Apologies that you couldn't hear the sound, but of course we will make that available if you want to see that. And we will also be doing a launch at the end of this month, inviting all the children and young people who participated and their families, and obviously members and special guests to come and view the feature-length video. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ed. Thank you for the presentation and for the running commentary and improvisation. Very good. Thank you. We'll invite Councillor Westbrook to come and talk to us, and then we'll do questions. And turn your mic off, please.
Thank you, Chairman. The beginning of this report starts quite rightly by talking about the partnership vision, and it aims to improve the lives of children, young people and their families in Basingstoke and Deane. The report talks about how the priorities have been developed by a range of organisations that support children, young people and their families to live happy, healthy and fulfilling lives in the borough. And it's great that children, young people and their families have also been involved in setting the direction of this work, which I agree will be fundamental to its success. It's right too that the Council decided to take a proactive approach to these changes to minimise the impact of service reductions. We all know that local authorities across the country have and are still having to respond to changes and losses to youth services and children's centres, despite the fact that we are being told that austerity is over. We shouldn't forget either why we are here today and how we got to this position. Back in 2010, Hampshire had 83 children's centres within 6 years. The Tories had reduced that to 11 across the county, and just the one here in Basingstoke, and that was despite 10,000 plus a petition from worried families, and that's quite a huge number that the County Council could only dream about in one of their consultations. The report on page 14 identifies large increases in youth-related antisocial behaviour, which has risen by 57% in the last year, and there has to be some correlation with this and the large number of police cuts. But nothing will change until we hold a general election, in my opinion, and change the government. So for the moment, I'm going to focus on where we are today. We first had briefings back in 2016, arranged by officers and attended by the community associations and midwives, etc., following the children's centre closures. A number of concerns were raised locally at that time, including the future level of resources. So can I ask, do we have enough staff to help children and families within our family support service role, including this Bright Futures programme? There are also concerns about safeguarding, training of volunteers and providers to identify issues and signpost families correctly. Volunteers at the time were very worried about the level of responsibilities placed upon them on what can sometimes be complex issues for which they may lack the skills. Have the organisation's concerns been addressed in relation to volunteer numbers, how to recruit, training, support and retention of staff? If so, how? How many centres are now picking up the local need that our 11 children's centres once provided? I know of 2 or 3 which are doing a very good job. I have regular contact with Westside Community Centre in my role as County Councillor, and they do a fantastic job. But what about the other areas? What about transport links for parents that struggle? And what about charging for activities? Are there free services available for families facing hardship? I do also have concern for the high level of referrals and the extreme pressure facing thresholds at level 3, which is the targeted early help, and level 4, the statutory social care. Is enough funding being made available, I ask, at level 1 and 2 to prevent families reaching that level 3 and 4? And how are we able to offer support for children with significant mental health issues, especially at an early preventative stage? This is a huge subject, and I know, but I hope the portfolio holder can answer some of my questions. In closing, I also recall that the leader of the County Council said following the closure of children's centres that as a good case point where a broad brush service had been replaced with a service targeted at the most in need, and I'm sure Councillor won't mind reminding him about how he agreed with the holistic approach that Hampshire had taken. I think 10,000 residents did disagree with that though. And we should remember though also that children's centres did provide that early intervention and were able, via close staff connections with schools and often through siblings, to identify family issues very early. I really hope that we can find the level of support needed going forward. However, I do fear that austerity may have a lot to answer for when our children, young people and families end up in great need. The costs associated with that for local authorities could far outweigh any of the ideological savings plans. Now finally, Chair, I'd like to ask if we will be having any KPIs on these projects for the whole of Basingstoke, so as to ensure that the Family Support Service and the Bright Futures 2050 programme extends to all areas. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm not sure how many of those you can answer in the time available, but do as much as you can, please.
Really, I think it's probably worth starting with probably actually think about the video. The video is a great example of that. there are resources out there. We know the public purse has been shrinking as far as services are concerned, but that project is a great example of when we talked about community centres and community associations doing more targeted work based on needs within their communities, which they weren't necessarily aware of as far as exactly what needs there were in very specific ways in different communities. That projects like that help them to understand what support's out there. Ed quite rightly talked about, working with BCOT, working with the Anvil Trust. What the work within the partnership shows me is there are lots of people that, which I would call out there as organisations, are a delivery mechanism for services, whether that's through schools, whether that's through community centres, and we've got people who want to deliver things, whether that's the Anvil Trust, whether that's some of the statutory services. And one of the things that we talked about when the partnership looked at this vision was, are we coordinated enough to understand how we connect those two parts to make sure what needs to be delivered is delivered where it can be delivered best and have the biggest impact. And one of those examples is something like that, because I suspect Popley Fields Community Centre, like many others, would go, do we know how to do this? We might be working with young people and families with complex needs and issues, or actually when they work with other people, there isn't that much they have to do, because lots of other people will come and do it for them who do have those skills and do have the funding and do have the resources. And that's one of the things that we really want to emulate in doing lots of other things. We've talked in this council a lot before about the support that schools need. We've had those conversations with the chair of the secondary schools heads meeting, and that's another conversation I've had with the new chair of that group, to turn them and say there are lots of organisations, and we've spoken to them, whether it be within an arts and culture strand, whether it be a health and wellbeing strand, whether it be within a sports strand, to say, look, there are ways of, as a council, our role being a way of convening those people so that we can set support up in a way that it's really easy for a delivery mechanism like a school that has access to all those young people and understands lots of needs to go, we need and want to focus on mental health, can you help us? And we've seen lots of those organisations with some support create great programs. The secondary schools are creating a program to deliver lots of mental health support for the secondary school age children in our borough. And we can help with making sure all of the other partners that can support that ready to be there to support them. So I think that is something that says, absolutely, Councillor Westbrook, we know there are issues as far as reductions within services delivered from the public purse. There are also lots and lots of things that other partners want to deliver and are really struggling to, as far as getting access to people that they want to deliver services for, and we can help massively with that as far as helping to get to coordinate, to identify where we need to target, and therefore help them to target their projects to do that. And that does unlock quite a lot of funding, because there are some areas where there is funding out there, and the worst thing that can happen is we miss the opportunity to access it, and we have organisations like the Anvil going, if only we had access to some young people, we'd be able to create a project and access some funding which another area might be able to access. Now, that doesn't answer all your questions, fundamentally, because ultimately we're dealing with quite a lot of partners who have that funding, have that service delivery expectation, but another example is a very tangible impact that this has as far as getting partners to work together. As a council, we've often articulated some concerns about waiting times to get people assessed through CAMS. And we've had some real tangible concerns about that. But getting people to work together has identified if there's been a knock-on impact of another service change on the waiting list. One of the specific things that's happened in our area is probably what's come up is an identifiable need that one of the massive increases in the waiting list has been a very clearly identifiable need for young people who probably have had some sort of pre-diagnosis that they need to be on an assessment list for some sort of challenge as far as being on the autistic spectrum somewhere. And another organisation has come in and said they don't need to wait to be assessed by CAMS to be told you then need to go over there. We'll look at those people first. And that's massively reduced the waiting times for CAMS. And those are the sorts of things that working in partnership can have real tangible benefits rather than all the organisations working in their silos. And we can just through BASP, and so not only on our own, have those sorts of significant tangible impacts on what that feels like for somebody with a mental health challenge who's a young person, and of course what we know families experience whilst waiting. And that may also be, we've got another partner who can get those parents who are supporting children with mental health needs together to say there's quite a lot of that whilst you're waiting that somebody else can help you with before you get your assessment. So those are just some examples of the real benefits. We can't talk to all of the things that you raise, partly because some of those things we don't have the stats. Some of those partners, if you like, we probably all know working with partners is difficult because some partners are more open to working with you early on before they end up having a problem where they want you to help them solve it. And we have that sort of mix within the dynamic of the partners that we work with. The ones that tend to work with us earlier, we tend to be able to help more. Sorry.
Did you want to give Ed a chance to answer any of the specifics? Because I noticed you were writing questions down, Ed. I don't know whether you had answers or just were writing the questions.
Just pick up on the safeguarding with safeguarding for our communities and having that training available through the Community Learning Partnership, which has various members, with BVA being one of those. We do offer safeguarding training to our communities, and there is actually one coming up at the end of this month. With the volunteers, we actively work with all of our youth provisions or our community centres, and that's with other various teams as well, to give them resources around how to retain and attract volunteers. And we always refer them to the Community Learning Partnership as well, where they also have training courses on how to recruit and retain volunteers.
Thank you. Yes, you can come back briefly.
Just briefly, Chair, I think, I appreciate what Councillor Bound said, and some of the things on there, were really good things. But I just think from where we started, obviously, I think we'll soon be coming up to nearly 2 years, I think, when we were put in this position. And obviously we're not Hampshire County Council, and we're doing the best we can, which is good. But I just would like to see some way of measuring the success, and also to try and find out how you can expand. And obviously you've got centres that work alone. I'm talking primarily community centres now, where we know there are 2 or 3 or 4 really, really good ones that are really operating well. Maybe not quite in the same way as children's centres, but they are offering some really good services. And I'd like to see some of that measured and some of that shared between other areas, because some areas they're going to be struggling, and I'm pretty sure Ed will know more about that than me, but we'd like to see that replicated across the borough, not just in a couple that are doing really well. And I think that's something we need to work on.
Just to speak to that point specifically, we know Westside is doing a great job. We know they get funding from other organisations. They also get funding directly from us. And that is something that we would expect, because we've got some learning invested in that to turn around and say, okay, we've invested some funding into that. What worked, what didn't work, understanding that they're being creative and they're going to do some things that sometimes it works better than others. I also happen to know Westside, and because we run a community centres managers group, that some of that learning is already being shared. And there is the next lot of funding that they're applying for with Westside and 3 other community centres, where again, some of that learning is about applying it to different communities, and whether that's just thinking about the next rollout that they're doing as far as delivering some of those services. We've got a community centre from an urban area, a new community, a rural community. So it's looking at that and saying, well, because of course there is something that says that learning will also be different in those different communities. So a lot of that is happening. And that's potentially why it's also difficult about KPIs, because some of that we can put KPIs in because we're funding some of it. Some of it, as far as if you thought about what the document goes through as far as the Brighter Futures vision, we start talking about themes. The next thing we start talking about plans, and the next thing after that we'll talk about how we evaluate how we've delivered against those plans as a partnership.
Okay, thank you very much. See you later. And questions, and Councillor Rattigan was the first hand I saw.
Thank you, Chair. Can we start at the beginning with the vision? It needs to be deeper and better thought out. That's apple pie and sunshine, frankly. We just need something a little bit more substantive than that. As for the priorities, I don't see anything on there about social cohesion. I don't see about people, families, young men being stakeholders in the borough. That is important. You know, you gotta buy into the borough, what we are, why we're doing it. I think that's a priority for here. We turn the page. Firstly, English is a foreign language. We have no data on that. Lots of people struggle with English in this borough. I think that is fundamental to what we do, and I would like it in the borough profile going forward. I won't go through them all, but young carers, 122 are supported, but how many are there? It's just ridiculous giving us a figure in isolation like that. Is it 500 and we're only getting to a quarter of them? Or is there 1,000 and it was 10%? I think it's not good enough that we get a figure like that plunked in front of us. I would like to see, you talked about healthy relationships. You didn't talk about the cyberbullying, the IT threat. That is very prevalent among the young as children move into adulthood through puberty. I think becomes a huger, a much more prevalent issue, and I think it should be part of the vision that's within there, that we protect the young when we can. That is our responsibility as leaders of the community. We know that a job is the best way out of poverty, and yet there's nothing in here about wraparound care, breakfast clubs, after school clubs, how that social cohesion can help, how we can encourage people to do more for themselves with the right support around them. I think that's absolutely vital, and I think it's so important. You talked about provision during the summer holidays and holidays. Are we looking to provide food for these children? Because many of them are poor, the poorest in society. Are we going to stretch our hand out and make sure that these children are not just fed in term time, but in the holiday period too? I think it's important that we try with the best intentions to feed them well, so as their brains work well, so as they've got the physical ability to enjoy their playtime. I think that's massive as far as I'm concerned. And there's lots of things, but I'm gonna leave the rest of the committee to deal with them. But that is just some of my thoughts on my first look at this as a piece of work that you've produced.
Thank you. I did spot one question in there, which was, are we going to feed them during the holidays? So you could answer that as a question. And if you want to make any other quick comments at this point, but I want to get the other questions in as well.
Just to pick up on, I suppose, that food comment, a lot of the youth provisions or providers actually provide a tuck shop. Some of the providers also provide hot meals as well. And of course, you know, if there is a family that they know of, they would subsidise it or give it for free. Some provisions provide it for free, but it all depends on where they get their funding from, because of course most of these provisions are funding reliant.
Okay, next question, I suppose it was Councillor McCormick.
Thank you, Chair. There's just questions at this stage. I assume we'll come back for debate. So I guess I've got 3 or 4 questions at least. The first one, which was alluded to by Councillor Westbrook, and looking through the paper right from the outset, really, I think as early as section 1.3 on page 7, the paper and the presentation behind it that we've had today and the appendix at the back speaks of noble objectives, but it's a bit light on how those might be addressed in terms of resources. So my question is, obviously we're at an advanced stage, and the final version is to be adopted by BASP on the 6th of December, which is a couple of weeks' time. Is there any thought being given to permanent facilities and uniformity of provision across the borough? I mean, children's centres did provide a degree of uniform provision because we had them in places like Overton as well as places like Popley, and they did cater for a broad range of people. I mean, the initial concern I have is that we've got some very good community centres out there like Popley Fields, like West Side, like the Ridgeway, like Rooksdown, but how can we ensure that we have every area of the borough? How do we ensure, you know, Bramley, Kingsclear, Overton, Whitchurch, Tadley all have similar provision, there are no gaps? How to ensure Brighton Hill and Kempshott, Winkerbury and Brookvale get the same as Popley, Oakridge and Buckskin if they've got really good centres? I mean, one of the disappointing aspects, I guess, about the family support model that Hampshire adopted was having one children's centre in Buckskin and then expecting people from Popley and Brighton Hill to catch 2 buses to get there, and, you know, basically effectively put these services beyond reach of people of limited means. And I'd like to get some answers if I can on what plans there are for resources and uniformity of provision. In addition to that, there's a lot of noble goals that I'll come back to in the tables at the back. Increasing range of physical activities, including play. There's an obvious question there. Traditionally, children used to get activity from parks and play areas. We've had a big reduction in those over the years. There's a maintenance overhead associated with them. You know, would there be any commitment from this council to address some of these things through its own resources and look at building new play areas and making sure that you know, sports pitches are more accessible with lower access fees, lower hire, that sort of thing, as part and parcel of this strategic vision? Because I think that's really important, that, you know, we have facilities, we need to look after them, and it's about service provision. It's not about money all the time. And other things.
That's 2 questions. Can we have answers to those 2, and then we
Yeah.
can come. Well, I might let some others in and then come back to you later. But
Okay. Yeah.
So that was one on uniformity provision and one about play areas.
If I can take the uniformity of provision, probably one of the things that we will struggle with, because we're dealing with the reality here, that, which is why I talk about ways of delivery locally versus those people who want to deliver service or can deliver services. You know, we have got different community associations, different community centres who are working with different schools, different heads who have a different level of whether it's awareness, whether it's interest, whether it's resource themselves, whether it's knowledge as far as what needs or what's going on within the catchment area. So all of those things give us some problems about service delivery uniformity. I'd also argue that I'm not sure that's really what we should be aiming for, because we've got communities with different needs where those delivery mechanisms will be. So you talk about West Side, Popley, Rooksdown, their needs are not necessarily the same as far as uniformity of delivery. So there is something about target and focus and working with different delivery mechanisms, which will give us a challenge as far as uniformity. And also, and I personally probably believe that some of our biggest delivery mechanisms are schools and community centres. We have no control over what it is they actually play ball with as far as who they allow to deliver services with, who they partner with. All we can do is influence. So all of those things give us lots and lots of issues as far as uniformity of delivery. If we go to, and probably what we're working with, which is why the video is such a good example, is we also get some areas of resistance. Lots of community centres have shied away from it because they are understandably concerned about their skills, but actually what they may not realise, it is not as complicated as they think it is or as difficult as they think it is. It can just be talking to the right provider who can come and do that stuff with them. So some of it's about how we pilot it in one area or come and do something for them and show them the benefits of the work that they can do and motivate them to do more delivery than they're currently doing by working with partners. When I say delivery, it's not them necessarily them delivering, but motivating them to deliver something locally, potentially by other partners. And when we talk about play, I think it's also, because you're quite right, you were talking about service provision. It's not only about service provision, which is why Ed was quite right to talk so clearly about play. There's also something which we know very clearly identified. There's also something about supporting parents to understand what they can do with very little as far as playing, being creative, storytelling, and all those things which we are doing with the work that we're delivering locally, because some of this local delivery mechanism that we are working with has a much better impact on helping parents to understand how they can play with their child with no service, not necessarily very much resources, and not necessarily very much money, which some of the other things that have happened historically have not achieved, because it's been a little bit more like somebody else playing and entertaining your child, and not necessarily any of that having a lasting impact on what parents do. And you're quite right, there are issues about play equipment and maintenance and all those things, but there's also something that when we start getting into this arena of working with some of the issues that we've got, that we're working with, that we've not worked with before as a local authority, it's much more basic than that. And some of it is about skilling parents to do stuff that doesn't need a play area, it doesn't need resources, it doesn't need a service. We just need to encourage them to do the play, and our local community centres are some of the best places to do that. So those are my thoughts about delivery and uniformity. It's fraught with difficulties because we're trying to do things from a position where we're not in control, we're not the statutory authority, and we're working through partners, whether that be service providers or delivery channels. And we're entering into new territory. We have got issues that traditionally we've focused on, which may be play equipment. And there are things that we can do more of. And some councillors in the room have done some great work to make sure that we do the maintenance that we need to do to those play areas. But there's also something which is, we don't want play areas to be sitting there underused because parents wouldn't have even thought about taking their child to a play area.
And did you want to comment on playing field charges? Because I know that's a topic of issue on the, further down this committee.
We can certainly note it. You know, we're here to note comments.
I will come back to you if you've still got questions that nobody else has asked. Councillor Judge, did you have your hand up earlier?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Look, I really welcome a lot of this. It seems very, very good. I particularly welcome the focus on the complex needs and the involvement of specialists in that and try and resolve some of these underlying problems. I think is extremely good. I would ask, though, exactly where getting those sorts of people there. Some of them are a little bit like hen's teeth, trying to find good people in that area, and how we can mobilise the resources. That's one question, how we can do that. The second thing is looking at very much the safe, happy and well children. I notice you've come to some specifics in here, which is, for example, the problems of cyberbullying. I see that awareness of risks of technology has increased. But as an underlying cause, certainly I would have thought things like drugs, alcohol abuse and everything else it doesn't occur anywhere in here. Could you explain to me how that is going to be built into that? Because that's one of the fundamental issues I think, particularly schools are finding very difficult to cope with, frankly.
Who's going to answer that one?
What we were just talking about going through is, because it sort of comes up with some of what I was talking about as far as the different strands, because of course one of the other strands we've got under the partnership is Safer North Hampshire, but of course one of the things that Ed has talked through is Think Safe. So of course Think Safe, when we talk about the large number of school children in year 7 that went through Think Safe, went through issues because there was a question earlier about cybersecurity, cyberbullying, etc., and as well as very practical things like dog safety and first aid, which we talked a lot, there was a very powerful session about cyber safety. and also understanding the issues around again, traditional things like stranger danger, but they're not necessarily things that year 7 would think about. Well, actually, you're about to go to secondary school and you'll start thinking about how you're going to be potentially engaged or encouraged to participate in drugs and drugs networks, etc., etc. So there's work that happens there as well. I personally think it's fair point that we a lot of that in the BAS partnership we put in Safer North Hampshire theme, and we haven't cross-referenced it into Brighter Futures. So it's certainly something I will take away, that when I said we've got different strands, but how do we make sure that Brighter Futures doesn't forget that, because it's hidden in a different strand.
Okay, it was Councillor Carruthers was the next one I'd seen.
It's great to see some of the events that you're running locally. Halloween one, brilliant. Something I noticed was that there was, 24 people in attendance. As a parent myself who actively involves my children in opportunities within the community, what I notice is that when you do these things, you see the same parents over and over and the same children over and over. How are you actively involving the children that really need to be there, that maybe don't have cars, don't have holidays, the children that don't have the opportunities? Because the children there were quite confident children, and I don't know anything about those children, but it would be nice to think that you're reaching the children that really need these things, that don't have other things they could be doing.
So, as we've said all the way through this is run by our partners, and a degree of the sessions that they run or the activities that they run is also down to the partners to be able to promote and engage with those communities that perhaps, as you've mentioned, may not have the money, may not be able to travel. I know that some of our youth providers provide transport. They have volunteers who pick up young people to bring them to those sessions. I know you're relating to that video that they look quite affluent, but please be rest assured that actually they were young people from all across the borough and all levels of where they live. And that was only a pilot. That was our first one as well. And the hope is that the funding will continue for next year, and that some of those partners that were involved can take more of a lead on developing that programme. One of the young people mentioned to me and said, why can't we have this this day happening in all of our youth centres across the borough? And we produced a massive, sorry, terminology, but a big video which incorporates all areas. And that is something that, you know, a young person has requested. We will obviously explore that, but it is down to our partners to engage and obviously promote that.
Thank you. Councillor Jones.
Thanks, Chair. Part of my question's been asked, but I would go along with Councillor Rattigan. We need more meat on the bones, what you're actually talking about. I don't think any of us could actually not. We would say, yeah, it's great. But from my area alone, how do you get to the hard-to-get families, you know? And I'll give you an example. There was a youth club. We're always struggling for money in our community centre because people haven't got a lot of it. Family of 2 or 3 children going to the youth club, they want their subs. They don't turn up because their mother or their father can't afford to pay the subs. They're the issues we should be talking about, and they're the issues, to my mind, that aren't being addressed here. You know, the hard to get people, you know, people at work with, I think most, well, I say most, I believe most people like to play with their children. But if they're on odd hours, working weekends, that's when the children are out and about. It's, you know, I can't knock what the video was. It's great. I wished it was happening everywhere. But what I'm trying to get to, we need to start putting meat on the bones. You know, my area in particular is deprivation. One of the is the worst in Basingstoke. I haven't seen any extra spending there. All we get in our community centre, you've got to hire it out more. You've got to do this. And we keep on telling Councillor Bounds, I will say that, we've had this conversation. The money isn't there, and he says it's the same as his area, which I disagree with, but that's another debate. But they're the things we want to see, and it's not just down to the council. These other organisations, it needs to be put in one pot. It can't be just, oh, we'll do this because we like doing this. It needs to be put there so it's there for everybody to get hold of if they wish to do it, and if for reasons they can't, we should then as a council find out why not and make sure they do.
I'm going to turn it into a question in my head, if that's all right, which is because we have had this debate before, and I think there's a reality, which is why I think West Side is a great example, because what we want to do is motivate and mobilise people, because the same money is available to West Side and South Ham as there is Buckskin. So there's a reality as about available of funding and increased funding. The increase of funding, the same opportunities are there, because West Side have got some funding from us for it. So the same opportunities have been there for every community centre to go for that funding. And just to pick up your other point, you were quite rightly saying, talking about meat on the bones, I'd go back to what this is. This is the draft vision with priorities of the BASP. It is not the plan. So I think there's an identification of it has yet got to be firmed up by BASP as far as agreeing it, so it's no longer the draft vision with priorities, but absolutely it then gets turned into a plan that puts the meat on the bones, which not only is something for us to put the meat on that bones, but also something that we can get the partners in BASP to commit to and deliver against.
I'll let you come back. Yeah, no,
I really didn't want to discuss Buckskin. That's why I never raised it in real terms. I said wrong area. But to be fair, what you're saying is absolute rubbish, because West Side, very well organised, and I wouldn't knock it, they've done it ever so well. We've got different problems. You know that. We talked over a year ago, 2 years ago about these. What's happened? Nothing. We've ignored it because West Side's doing well. I don't know, Kempshot might be, which is in between my ward. And it hasn't been taken up because no one's there to take it up. And that's not just looking at you. There's a lot more involved. Health, for instance, as you know, it's one of my key things down there. Nothing's happened over the years. We have little things happening in the community centre, but the real health issues down there are not being dealt with. Now, how we do that, I don't know, but I've spoken with the CCG, you talk to them every time, oh yes, it's terrible, must do something, and nothing happens. So you wonder why people in my area in particular, but it's not just that, people say, oh, we'll give up, we'll do anything. I'll keep fighting, don't worry.
Well, that's why I go back to why this is important, because if we can get our partners, including the health system, to sign up to this vision and to sign up to the priorities, we can then get the CCG to sign up to their plan, and then we can hold them to account. And that's why I also go back to being targeted and focused.
can I just ask, because you mentioned the plan a couple of times now, is this going to be our plan or BASP's plan? BASP plan. Okay, fine. The next person I have is Councillor Richards.
Thank you, Chairman. So just looking at this BASP board, the one thing that's missing for me, I don't see the mention of schools anywhere. And schools are pretty fundamental here, I would have thought. Certainly in Tadley, I mean, we have quite a good relationship. I work at the Point, which is our youth centre, and we have a close relationship there with the Hurst. Our youth worker goes in there once a week, trying to encourage people to come to the youth centre after work and after school and so on. And they, as I see it in Tadley, play quite a crucial role. And the headmaster of the Hurst is quite involved. We have the Hurst Community Centre as well. But I see no mention of it here when you're talking about who's involved in the strategic partnership. I wonder, are you actually talking to schools as well? I presume you are, but it's not down here.
I think it's fair to say, if we were to look at the who's involved in this vision and the picture that talks about the themes, colleges and schools are very heavily involved in the Children, Young People and Families partnership, and also in the Employment and Skills Zones partnership as well. And that probably is underlined, although it's not said explicitly, of course, Anthony Bravo is the chair of BASP. So children, young people, education and providers are right in there at the core of BASP.
Okay, I'm sure they are. I hope they are. What I'm saying is, in this picture here, I don't see any mention of the word school, or you know, it just looks. It's a bit of a vague sort of this strategic group is this strategic partnership. I mean, I presume. I mean, I'd like to see them working in operation, see who actually is involved physically and how they go about their task. But you know, I'd have thought somewhere there would have been the word school mentioned. That's all.
And probably the reason why it's hidden away in the themes is because, of course, in that sort of rather generic answer, everybody's involved in it, all interacts with each other. But there is also a practical consideration that says for all of the partners in any partnership, people participate to a different degree.
Right, that's it. Oh, yes. I was about to say that was everyone who hasn't had a go yet, and now I've got Councillor Kim Taylor.
I'd like to echo some of the things that Councillor Rattigan was saying. Overall, this is lacking in strategic intent. It is lacking in aspiration. It is lacking in action, and it is lacking in focus. I understand that it's a partnership approach, but I am seriously disappointed at the lack of robustness in terms of the themes and where we want to be by key partners such as the CCG and the Hampshire County Council, particularly with regard to education. This is very sparse when it looks at young people in terms of the 14 to 18-year-old age group. There's no mention of apprenticeships. You know, talk about a lack of aspiration in terms of mental health and well-being for young people. We want to be in a position where people can recognise the signs of mental health. Well, how about actually having some provision for them and saying we want to have provision that they can access within a very short period of time? And that's typical everywhere. It's not good enough to say that providers should have the knowledge to support individuals with complex needs. We should be saying they need to get access to assessment within a very quick period of time and defining that. It's not sufficient to just be very woolly about additional learning and education. Why isn't Hampshire County Council committing to providing an educational strategy for Basingstoke that covers all age groups right up to the age of 18? I mean, this really, as a bit of hope, somebody who's worked in the education structure and therefore coordinated with lots of these people before in the past, as a piece of homework, this is not yet competent. It is just really poor. I'm sorry. That's just my
Okay, that
comments.
wasn't really a question either, but you might want to make an
You
observation.
wanted feedback, and you've got, and that's what I've given. Oh, sorry.
I'm quite happy to take the feedback because as a piece of homework, of course, it's not only ours. Some of that is taking that and giving the marks back to the people who've done their homework, and I'm more than happy to take that feedback back.
I think we can try and finish questions, but that would be... Sorry, now it's Councillor McCormick's turn.
I've got two questions. I would have more, but I'm conscious of the time. Picking up on Councillor Kim Taylor's point, when you look in the table at the back, there are some fairly challenging things. Page 15, for instance, additional learning and education, professionals provide more diverse skills to develop additional learning activities. Now, Anthony Bravo, Principal of BCOT, Chair of the BASP, I think some of these things are beyond his gift. So we're not just talking about apprenticeships, not just talking about technical colleges. I mean, we're talking about universities, we're talking about professional training, postgraduate, you know, for the skills of tomorrow. I don't see this being touched on here, and I don't see any inclination or any understanding as to how we might achieve those objectives and grow Basingstoke. I mean, this is supposed to be a vision of 30 years' time. In 30 years' time, we'll have, 250,000 people in the borough, considering more than we got now. Things happen a lot in 30 years. At the moment, we're doing a lot less things than we were doing 10 years ago, and that's down to the current financial climate. So, my question is, why haven't we thought a bit more about how we might reach out to some of these providers to fill some of these gaps, specifically things like how we might get a university in Basingstoke and actually make a commitment. If it's a 30-year goal, got time to do it. How we might do that. That's question one. Question two was a little bit more sort of technical in terms of corporate implications, legal implications, page 8, section 4.1. This council has no statutory duty to deliver services for children. So, we all understand it's Hampshire County Council's role. But in 30 years' time, there might not be a Hampshire County Council. We might be in a unitary authority then. And it doesn't appear that any thought has been given to that eventuality. So has any thought been given to that eventuality, and could that be informed in the plan as it develops? Because we could be looking at a very different council structure in 30 years' time.
I'm not sure what to say to the unitary one. Probably the best answer that I can give is when we get to the position of plan, rather than the vision, we'll have a piece of work, no matter who's responsible for it, that they will accept needs to be delivered. So if the structure changes, doesn't mean to say the work stream changes as far as what needs to be delivered in the plan. And just to build on that point, I was talking about strands before. I think a lot of what you're talking about, Councillor McCormick, is in the employment and skills zone partnership. Because there is the aspiration as far as higher education, and as part of BASP we do have HE providers involved, not only BCOT as far as further education. So people like Winchester University and the LEP, who of course are also focused on higher education in our area, employment and skills, are also part of our partnership.
Thank you. Councillor Rattigan. Question, please.
Yeah, I just, as Councillor McCormick says, I fail to understand why the vision is 30 odd years away. It's going to be generation miss in that, and frankly it's not good enough. We should be setting targets for 5, 10 years, 15 years, because that's a generation. 2020 is too far. We don't know where the world will be by then, and we're trying to shape something that is almost impossible. If you look back 50 years, we had the Beatles. Well, music's moved on a lot since then. I just think this is the wrong vision for the wrong time, and we ought to be rescoping it to try and do things more quickly, with proper timescales on them, and people will buy in much better if they think they can see the light at the end of the tunnel.
Just to give you some idea of process, one of the BASP processes, because it is always difficult herding partners together, is of course part of that planning process is then pinning them down to say, what are you going to do in 5 years, 10 years? So we've got something that everybody is very focused on as far as aiming. Getting people to agree a draft vision is absolutely step one in that process. It doesn't mean to say that we don't get to that point where we're very focused, very targeted, very aspirational, and very clear about what people are going to deliver in 5 years' time.
Then can I ask you to change the draft, Brighter Future 2030 or 2025? But frankly, that is not good enough as a header.
It's not me that changes it, it's BASP, so I'm more than happy to take that feedback, absolutely.
Okay. Is this a question or is it? Well, let me start the discussion then, and then you can first go to the discussion. I mean, I think, because we've got to try and draw some conclusions out of this. I think there's a general recognition that this is very high level. And so I think we want to say that we are very keen to see the plan when there's a plan, and we would expect the plan to have some measurable indicators, targets, on a much shorter timescale than 2050. So I think we can probably all coalesce around that to get us started. And Sadie's scribbling away here, so that'll be in the minutes, won't it? We've just agreed that. Beyond that, there's been a lot of comments. So if you want to try and persuade us to all adopt something specific, by all means. But we're not going to write a 30-page essay on this. No, Councillor Kintaylor's going first.
I'd actually like to have this sent back, because I don't believe that it is actually strategic. And I think if you use this as a basis to formulate actual plans, they're going to fall very short. You know, just literally taking that mental health one, you know, if what we're saying is where we want to be is that people are able to recognise the signs of mental health as opposed to deal with the issues, then your plans are going to be around how many leaflets we can write. They're not going to be about how many, you know, practitioners we need, how much additional service the CCG will put into it. And so, you know, I actually have a real concern that the focus of this is way too low. It really, I'd just send it back.
Anyone else want to adopt that? Not sure that we can, but I mean, it's a proposition, so you can debate it. Councillor Jones.
Yeah, I think, you know, what I think we're getting from both sides here, that it's not good enough, so why are we accepting it? It should go back and it should come back to us and we can debate it again. There's been enough points. There's been positive points as well. I don't think we should say it's all negative, because it isn't. Some of the stuff that's happened is good. No one should be knocking that. But we're looking for the future and the problems we got in our borough. And this is a way to solve it. This is not going to solve it. So it should go back to be rewritten perhaps by all your people on that board or whatever, because I must admit I've sat on a few of them over the years. And all it is ducking who's going to pay for this and who's going to pay for that. That's what it looks like to me. Hope I'm wrong, but, you know, if the borough's got deep pockets, it always has it in the past. It carries a lot of the burden, and other organisations says, well, yeah, I'll help, but I can only put this. And I think that's the way this is going. That's what worries me. Thank you.
On the proposition of sending it back, I mean, if it was our officers' work, we could send it back. But it's not our officers' work. BASP are going to make a decision on this in 2 weeks' time or something, isn't it? So you know, so you can, if you want, to say we don't support it, but that may or may not be a majority view. But there's no lot of points saying we want to send it back, because it's not ours to send back. Councillor.
Well, I think I can put a position that the committee will quite happily unite against. You know, it's a step in the right direction, but it doesn't go far enough. And there's a couple of key things. I will ask a couple of rhetorical questions here. We know what the answers are. Where is the roadmap? There isn't one. Some of these goals could be achieved within the next 5 years. It's difficult to see how it's going to take 30 years to achieve some of them. Where's the money? There's no commitment to resources, not even by the council as backing someone up. There's not even been a satisfactory answer in terms of real basic stuff like provision. I mean, at least when we had children's centres, we had a degree of uniform provision. They weren't in every area, but they were in a lot of areas. Now we've got one that serves an impossibly wide area. So, you know, in terms of sending it back, it just doesn't go far enough. There's no meat on the bones.
Well, with respect, that was what I started with. That
Yeah.
It's only a strategy. We want to see the plan, and we want to see some actual targets with shorter term things like 5 years. So that's exactly, you just called it a roadmap. I called it a plan with targets. It's the same
But
thing.
it's not.
Funds is a different thing. We haven't actually addressed that yet.
But in terms of a vision, I mean, it's not. It's a deficient vision. It's a bit like the vision is like, oh, it's foggy. I can see 50 yards. You know, get the fog lights on. There's not much clarity to this vision. I mean, they've picked out some key statistics about how, you know, how obesity or mental health and a whole load of other things. Okay, yeah, it's good to see that in the report. It doesn't really say much more than some really weak, warm words about where we want to be, level of physical activity increased. Well, that's kind of like 101, isn't it? It's you know, anyone can say we want more physical activity. How are we going to do it? Are we going to provide more facilities? Who's going to provide the facilities? Who's going to put the money behind it? There should at least, I mean, this is just like basically a starting document. This is like Vision 2020, to be honest with you. And, you know, you look at section 1.1 and it says it aligns it with the Horizon Vision 2050, which I know was ripped apart in another committee not long. You know, I think the two really do go hand in hand and they're both equally deficient. We should be aiming a lot higher for this. It's 30 years' time. If we go back 30 years, and I got my history book here, you know, what was Basingstoke doing 30 years ago? In many aspects, we were achieving more 30 years ago than we're aiming to achieve in this plan. Admittedly, times were different. It was pre-internet, but we had some very serious challenges in terms of children and adult mental health 30 years ago. In Councillor Bound in your ward, we of course had a mental hospital then, which was subsequently shut, which provided us a very good provision. But times change. Maybe we'll have an expanded Parklands at some point in the future as part of the raft of things. And then there's no sort of credence paid to the massive amount of stress that some of these providers are under. Different community centres doing different things. Well, they're stretched. Some may be blessed at having expertise and being able to offer people and knowing the contacts and reaching out, but you're never going to get a provision that's satisfactory in many parts of the borough because community centres are stretched and they're run by volunteers. It would be much better to have some kind of backup from the council for some of these things. So we say, West Side's doing something good. Winkelbury wants to do it. Let's help them do that. There's none of that in this document. It just doesn't aim anywhere near high enough.
Councillor Rattigan.
I warned before that the page 12, which is the borough profile, this just needs to be redone, frankly. There are lots of statistics and percentages, but it doesn't tell us the numbers. 23.1% of children in reception. How many kids is that? You know, so as we'll know, if there was a bigger population, it was still 23.1. It's more kids. We ought to be doing that. These reports are not full enough for us to see. And I know it's not your report, but when you read it, did you not think, actually, I don't know how many kids that is? No. Well, then I do, because well, you know how many kids are in reception. What 23.1% is? Do you?
I think this is the reality, isn't it, that actually what we've got in front of us with the BASP document for Brighter Futures is that probably at quite a frustrating level for us, a pulling together of some stats where we may know, because we're close to it, what the figures are. Other partners may know, others may not. And I think that's also that stuff, isn't it, if I may enter into the debate as far as vision, I think being pragmatic about it, we know, because we're an authority that does things like local planning, how long we look to the future. We're also working with partners, and some of them don't look to vision because they're stretched. So actually getting them to come up with a plan which is longer than 12 months is hard enough. And I'm not saying that because I'm more than happy to take that back to BASP, but I just think I just want to give that reality back, that there are some partners where that is a very difficult conversation.
But officers, yourself as the cabinet member, have seen this report before we saw it a week ago, right? It isn't fit for purpose. If we don't know what we're discussing, it's not good enough. I mean, you've named the number of schools, infant schools. Well, how many secondary schools? Why isn't that on the air? I mean, it's just not right, and it's not good enough that we get committee papers that don't allow us to have the information to our hand. And you know, Simon, I feel gutted, because this should have been a vision, something that we could all coalesce around, something that we could feel energized and optimistic about, that we would get behind. And quite frankly, it's ended up with it being a bit of a dog's dinner. If we're honest, because it doesn't have enough in it about education and why so many of our kids go to West Berkshire or to Hart or to Winchester to get their secondary education. There's nothing on that. We should be standing beside our communities and saying, this is the best borough to educate your children, whether it be in nursery, whether in primary or in secondary school. But there's nothing there to do that. And I think that's a miss. I'm losing kids out of Ashford Hill and Kingsclere who are going to West Berkshire for the secondary education. And I am hamstrung in how I can help them stay within the borough. There's nothing I can do as an elected official. The county are too far away. Let's just be blunt about it. They don't listen to small communities like Kingsclere and Ashford Hill. And this is our opportunity to feed into that, and I don't think it works. And I think you need to hand that back to them and say, this this is not a vision that we can buy into at the moment, because it doesn't allow us to formulate good thoughts about what we can do to improve this borough.
Councillor Capon.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to, I was drawn back to what the committee's invited to do. And for me, looking at those points, the document feels like it serves the purpose that the committee is being asked to do to an extent, acknowledging some of the points that have been raised. So firstly, we're asked to note the engagement that's taken place. Well, from looking at the BASP structure, it appears clear that actually there has been a range of partners being engaged with as part of the BASP structure. So again, noting that these things, my assumption, and again, it is only assumption because there isn't it here in black and white, but looking at the range of partners, therefore these priorities, I would be led to believe that they've come as a result of that partnership working. So that's tick in terms of point one, as far as I'm concerned. The second point that the committee is invited to do is to comment on the approach. Well, in terms of the approach, what I can see here are two priorities that are aspirational in terms of their broadness. So priority one being safe, happy and well, that is broad enough to allow strands and themes to emerge under it. And in terms of priority two, opportunities to learn covers the points raised about education. In terms of making the most of their talents and having aspiration, there is aspiration written into that priority too. So again, if we're looking at it as a strategic document, it's broad enough to encompass strategic strands underneath it, because we're not there yet. The committee isn't asking to note a finished and finalised strategy, it's being asked to comment on the approach. And for me, that approach is encompassed by a broad enough priority, and also underneath that, themes that actually, looking at those, I think I can see 8 themes, cover a significant proportion of what's being mentioned. There is employment in there, there is additional learning and education. So we're looking at themes that seem relatively broad enough to allow the operational elements to be added underneath. And then we're then flowing into what do we know. I appreciate there have been some comments which I actually agree with in terms of the profile of the borough. Some of them are just numbers, and what do they mean in the context? Absolutely, I would echo that as well, that there is some context required. But in terms of what we know, there are some statistics that can be broadened out. But in terms of themes, what we know, where we want to be, and then how we want to get there, the basic building blocks of an initial starting point, which is what, in my view, the committee is being asked to note, are there. So that's what I wanted to say.
Thank you. Councillor George.
Thank you, Chair.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead. Really, just from my perspective, looking at the big picture here, I think what we've got here is a mixture of very sort of broad aspirational things, such as the vision and priorities. And you can see, yes, some work's gone into generating those, and they're all things we could obviously support. But then when we get to these tables, what we're left with is a mixture of fairly broad things and very specific things. And what I would really like to see, if we're going to be serious taking this forward, and it's meant to be a constructive thing here, is really is an understanding of the underlying causes behind all of this. It doesn't come out here really in any way. What are the underlying causes to the problems we're trying to resolve? And then we can put a plan together to actually try and tackle them. I'm getting it patchy here. There are some mentioned here, clearly, antisocial behaviour, but, you know, it's the understanding of the underlying clauses so we can then develop a plan to tackle those. And I don't see that theme of, you know, issue, what are the causes, how do we tackle it, running through this document at the moment. So it's intended to be a positive feedback, and I hope it's taken that way.
Thank you. That is a new point. Do you want to comment on that? Because it is, I think, a point that hasn't been made.
I suspect what we're talking about is some of the difficulty of capturing on paper where drivers for different partners come from and agreeing common themes. And whilst I agree with you, I think it'd be quite an interesting and maybe time-consuming conversation to have with the partners and I suspect what BASP has done is, well, if we can all agree on the priorities, we don't necessarily have to spend a lot of time on understanding the causes, because we may all understand what they are. Doesn't necessarily mean it's very well articulated for somebody to then look at this piece of paper, because in some respects what you're looking at is a piece of work that you've not been involved and engaged with, and this is sort of a summary document for those people who have. But the feedback clearly is it doesn't articulate that well enough to somebody who's reading it as somebody who isn't involved.
Councillor Jones.
Yeah, I'll just really comment. This committee is here to scrutinise. We've scrutinised it. We're saying it's not up to standard, in my view. And that should, I think it's been taken on board. I would imagine it has. All right, it's not our document as such, but if they're asking us to look at it, it should go back and say it's not good enough. We're not saying we just wouldn't vote for it. We want something better. I think that's the bottom line. Whether they want to do it or not may be another question, but we're here to scrutinise, and that's what we've been doing. We might, I don't think we disagree with a lot of the elements in it, but we would need more stuff on it, more meat on the bone, as we keep on saying.
Yeah, well, I was trying to find out whether that's what we all thought. I mean, it's not what I think. I think it's yeah, there are some detailed criticism, but in general, it hits the right note as the starter document. What I want to see is the next document, which is the thing that really tells me what's going to happen. Now, but if other people, if the majority of the committee want to say, we don't think this is up to speed as up to scratch as the starting point, we can say that. How much good it'll do us, I don't know, but if that's what the committee want to say, we can do.
And also, it's one of the reasons why I use the word motivate. BASP is there to try and motivate partners, and I suppose I'm more than happy to take the feedback, but I'm also very focused on giving the feedback in a way that motivates partners to do more. Some of the criticism and comment that I think I've heard this evening is a criticism and comment that may be construed and may be the cause as to why we've got this mix of sort of short-term detail commitments, and part of me is sitting here going, with some of those partners, I know how hard it is for them to make that commitment, let alone some of the bigger commitment that I think we'd all like to see.
Yeah.
Sorry, Simon, can I just comment on that? I mean, just deal with the vision to create brighter futures. Brighter than what? I mean, it's just ridiculous. We should know what it's brighter than. It's the vision, and it's wrong to begin with. We need to say to them, you need to tighten up. You need to give us a little bit more. You need to make sure that what you present, because they're presenting it to each other, is the meat on the bone. It's enough to say it's brighter than it currently is, or brighter than the average kid in London, or wherever it is that they want it to be brighter than. You've got to state it.
That's, I mean, yeah. Councillor Richard.
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree with what you're saying, Ken, but, a vision or a mission statement, or whatever you like to call it, is one thing. Then but what you're looking for, I think, is the result. What is it you want to achieve? Brighter than what? Well, we want percentage of children to achieve this or something, or, to put some targets in. That's what we talked about in the first place, isn't it? KPIs. That's what...
There's no percentage. There's no percentages. I'm just saying, when you're writing a vision, make sure it's understandable and achievable. Because, brighter, I mean, it could be brighter than the kids in the 1930s. It's just not right. And I know it's not your world, and this is feedback, and we're all trying to be positive on this. It's because we believe that there is a brighter future out there, but you've got to articulate it in the vision. Otherwise, you can't work to that vision.
And I just go back to, all I want to just go back to is, and maybe some of it's sharing my pain, because I don't disagree with lots of the comments that have been made this evening. It's the getting people to agree to a vision, and we all know different organisations have a different view about how they articulate that, how detailed they are. And one of my summaries from the conversation in BASP with the partners about the vision statement is their approach was one of keeping it relatively loose for reasons that made sense to BASP. They may not make sense to people who are in this room.
And can I make one other observation. If you look at the beginning of the foreword, it says this vision has been developed with children, young people and their families living in the borough. If we rubbish this, we are potentially discouraging a lot of people who are not professionals, not councillors, who've had... I'm just saying, we can do that. I'm going to take a consensus in a minute, and if that's what the committee want to say, that we think this is not a suitable document to be taken forward, it needs to go back and have a fundamental, we'll say that. But it's not a view I share. Councillor Jones.
We're not rubbishing in the focus on where it's going, but there's nothing on it to say how we get there. And that is the bottom line. And it's no good saying, well, families have been involved. How many families? 200, 300 children? We don't know. And that's one, it's part of what we've been saying just now. Has it been in my ward? Has it been in your ward? I haven't heard of it. Have we had cause to get involved in it as councillors? I haven't, but that may be just me not picking up my email or whatever. But, you know, they're the things we want to know. But it's no good being frightened to say it's not up to standard because a few families have got involved. We hope they stay involved. Hope we get more involved, because they're the real answers. When you get families and people involved, it gets the real answer. It gets above the so-called professionals, because all they're, in my view, and I'm very biased, all they're looking at the end of the day is the blooming budget, and that's why you got to go softly, softly. I understand that, but I don't think it's up good enough. Thank you.
Just to say, to say it again, we're all agreed that it doesn't tell us how it's going to be delivered. That's fine. The question is whether we're complaining that it should be in this document, or whether we're going to say, no, this is the vision, this is the whole level thing. Just get on and tell us how it's going to be delivered, because that's the bit that really matters. Councillor George.
Thank you, Chair. Just to reflect on what's been said, and I agree. If we can go back very positively to say and welcome all the participation that's gone on here, all the hard work that's obviously gone into that, I think that's a very positive message we can go back. And obviously, you know, as Councillor Bound has said, you know, there's a lot gone underneath here that isn't reflected in this document. I don't think there's any problems here of going back and welcoming all the work they've done and all the coordination, everything else, but saying we don't think this document specifically reflects all of that hard work and all the thought that's gone into it, and maybe they want to think again about the way it's presented. Is that a possible way forward?
Okay, so is the consensus that we want to say that this needs substantial changes as a vision? Yes? Okay, I think that seems to be the consensus, so we will reflect that. That's and Councillor McQueen.
Well, the concerns I have really about the overall process. In section 1.3 it says, this report seeks the committee's views on the draft Brighter Futures vision and priorities. This will inform the final version that is due to be adopted by BASP on the 6th of December. That's not a long time away, and we're recommending some really big changes. So I think we've been brought in a bit late in the day, given that this started way back in September, or possibly even earlier than that. And right at the very end, we're being brought into, it looks like it was assumed when this process is drawn up that we were just going to rubber stamp it, I guess, because there's not enough time there to do the wholesale changes that I would like to see in it, certainly. I mean, in terms of a vision, what I would like to see is every child who's ill gets to see a doctor within a week with an appointment. That's not possible at the moment. CCGs can't even recruit doctors, let alone provide some of the services that's set out in this vision. Every child and parent has access to a children's centre and resources there. That's not here. There's about half a dozen other things I could say on a similar thing. It's not there. All we're saying is things like we recognise that there's a risk that children are susceptible to grooming online. It doesn't really go much further than that. It says we will try and stop them being groomed online. If we want a vision statement, when no child should be left unprotected, and that the necessary supports in place for every child and every family.
Right, Councillor Kim Taylor.
Sorry. I mean, we're asked to comment on the priorities, and when you look at the table, the tables set out the priorities, and the priorities in terms of under the column heading of where we want to be, those are the things that are going to inform and drive the actual action plan. And when the things that are in the column under where do we want to be are really short term, I mean, a couple of these, you know, I could probably crack a couple of those off in a couple of weeks, to be honest with you. You know, they are really short term, and that doesn't make this a set of priorities for 2050. You know, it just doesn't. So my issues really are about the fact that the identified priorities are really low level and non-specific and not ambitious.
Right. Is that a general feeling that they're not ambitious enough?
Thank you, Chair. I personally disagree with the feedback on the vision in terms of that statement. There are multiple partners involved in this, looking at that diagram, and therefore each angle, depending on the angle of focus, will have a different element to bring to that vision. So therefore that's why, to me, it makes sense that there is that single statement that says it's about brighter futures, because actually then it's as you get further down the strategy that takes shape. Otherwise, if you included sentences like, you know, we want, you know, all children to have access to X or Y or Z, that alienates the angle from other partners involved in this, is the view I would personally take. So actually I personally disagree that it's not the right approach, because I would actually echo what Councillor Taylor's just said about where we want to be, not being as far-reaching as it could be. That I absolutely do echo, and I think that there could be some additional bits put in there to make it, particularly if it is going to 2050, then it does need to be more far-reaching. But in terms of the approach, the structure, the kind of starter for 10, it given all the partners around the table, it feels personally that there is some good work in that.
Right, now, and we're not going to be able to put in the minutes everything that's been said. It's all in the webcast. The portfolio holder has heard it, but I think the headlines of what we're going to have to put are, and Sadie's going to regret that she was substituting tonight, but it's something along the lines of, I mean, overall, we don't think this is fit for purpose as the vision. I think that's what the majority indicated they wanted to say. We don't think it's ambitious enough. That was Kim's word you just used. And I don't think there's been any specific omission in terms of the vision that we need to highlight, but we are very concerned at what comes next. And perhaps we can have a commitment that what comes next will come back to us perhaps earlier in its gestation than this has.
Michael, just to do with that, of course, what we wait for is BASP to finalise it, and we aren't in control of that. Yeah. So, you know, it does come here as quickly as we can get it.
Right. So we'd like to see the plan as quickly as you can get it, and have a proper debate. And we specifically would expect to see a lot more specifics on targets and funding in the plan. I think those are yes.
Chair, can I suggest, therefore, that the BASF chair comes when the plan is brought to fruition, that he delivers it himself? I mean, you know, if he's the owner, why shouldn't he talk about it?
Would you like to comment on that, or shall we?
I'm quite happy to somebody else to sit in the chair.
Right. Okay. Shall we put that as a? We think it would be helpful if. Yeah, we would invite him.
And maybe just thinking about how BASP works, it might be the person that is leading on it, because in some respects the chair and vice chair do different things.
Okay, is that okay? It's capturing it. Thank you very much. That was it wasn't a debate I was expecting, but that was certainly very interesting. I'm sure it's been enlightening for our visitors. So thank you, officers. Jane, you got a very light evening. I don't know how you escaped, but thank you to Councillor Band. Now, quick shift around of people. Okay, we're just a brief search for a missing nameplate. Anyway, so now we're moving on to item 6, provision of the new cemetery at North Waltham, and we've got folio holder Councillor Eachus, who's going to give us a brief introduction. Tom Payne, who's not going to give us a PowerPoint, but is going to give us a little talk through of this, and Linda Shaw, welcome. Over to you.
Thank you, Chair. As you say, I'll give a brief introduction, then I'll hand over to Tom to go through the paper in more detail. But just by way of background, as we probably all know, Wortin Road Cemetery is reaching capacity, and back in 2014, the council took the decision to continue to provide cemetery provision in the borough, and then after that, we did go on, as agreed, to purchase the North Waltham site. The council isn't actually obliged to provide a cemetery service, but this council is committed to providing a cemetery, and that commitment hasn't changed, and we went ahead and purchased the site. We're just reviewing now, all these years on, how we deliver that service, and what we want to do is make sure that we deliver that service in the way that gives best value for residents but also provides the best service for residents. The options we're looking at in the paper, which Tom will go through, is to enter into a lease and management agreement with Dignity, and that sets out that it will offer the council the greatest control and influence for the future of this service within the borough, and then as well as reducing the council's likely future spend. But the key is that we will maintain that influence, and there will be regular reviews of Dignity as this goes on. The proposal addresses all of the council's requirements for a cemetery, and probably more actually. Any future cemetery provision in the borough will cater appropriately for all recognised faiths and groups. The charge for standard burial provision for borough residents will be based on the council's current fees. There'll be joint branding to link the service to the borough council, and local monumental masons and funeral directors will not be disadvantaged as a result of any arrangement moving forward. And actually they were given the opportunity to attend this council and meet with officers, which a number of them did, and had some quite positive discussions. And I think Tom will touch on that as well. Throughout any negotiations with Dignity, care has been taken to ensure that the resident is at the heart of this, and that the customer experience currently achieved by this council will continue to be achieved and will be reflected in that proposal, and I'm confident that that is the case. And Dignity reassured us that their current service practice will continue to meet that, and even possibly, given they're the experts, exceed this. So, you know, I do support the proposal for all of those reasons, and I'll hand over to Tom to give some more information.
Yeah, good evening. So as has been explained, the Borough Council does not have a statutory responsibility to provide cemetery. Our duties are limited to just providing for public health funerals and for the maintenance of closed churchyards. So public health funerals, for those that don't know, just effectively where someone's passed away, doesn't have a next of kin, nobody's willing to make the funeral arrangements, and that's when the council steps in to make those necessary arrangements. We have very few of those each year. Typically about 7 is about the top number that we've made arrangements for. It still doesn't mean that the council would have to provide burial provision for somebody for a public health funeral in the borough. You know, if you're an authority that doesn't have a cemetery, which there are numerous around, you would simply look to your nearest neighbour to provide it. So, yeah, that's one of the duties that we have as a borough council. The Worting Road Cemetery, as we've discussed, at the moment we have enough capacity until 2020 for non-denominational and Christian grave spaces, so people can continue purchasing them up till about that date. Although, as is put out in the report, there is a lot of capacity there in terms of particular faith groups moving forwards, and a lot of people have pre-purchased grave spaces at Worting Road. So the actual operation of Worting Road is going to continue for about 60 years in terms of, you know, the burials that are likely to take place over that time. Obviously, as mentioned, the council took the decision to purchase the North Waltham site, and since then we've been looking at the options to deliver the service there. As has been explained, there are 3 basic options set out in the report. The first is to withdraw from this type of service, as it's not a statutory responsibility. The second is to directly manage and develop the site. And the third option is to enter into an agreement with a private sector company to deliver and operate the new cemetery. Before we entered into any conversations with any external providers, a few key requirements were established. The first being that the cemetery would have to cater for all recognised faith groups. The second being that the standard burial charge that we set as a borough council would apply, and that would be set, controlled by the council. That there would be appropriate branding, which again links Basingstoke and Dean Borough Council to this service that's provided there. And lastly, that the monumental masons and funeral directors would not be disadvantaged as a result of any arrangement with an external provider. There are only two suppliers who could conduct that type of activity. They are the Dignity Group and the Westerly Group. We have approached the Westerly Group, who confirmed that if the opportunity was presented, that they would not be interested in remotely managing a cemetery service at North Waltham. Therefore, the discussions that we've had have obviously concentrated on working with arrangements with Dignity. As is set out in the report, Dignity is a really large funeral company, has 65, if you like, different services they're providing. They directly provide 45 crematorium and 5 cemeteries, but they also work with 15 local authorities to provide a cemetery service in different areas. Again, we've been provided with lots of details in terms of their customer service that they achieve. They've got number 1 in terms of contact centre awards. Again, we're very confident in the level of service that they are able to offer. In terms of the potential working arrangement with Dignity, we have been involving a national cemeteries expert, Peter Mitchell, who has been part of the team, if you like, in-house that's been reviewing the potential opportunity to work with Dignity. And he has endorsed, if you like, the potential arrangement with Dignity, who feels that it would be an appropriate arrangement for the council to pursue. So the key proposals that Dignity have put forward are this one-site philosophy. So, clearly at the moment Dignity are looking to develop their own part of the site. So they operate the crematorium. They put in a planning application, I think a couple of years ago, for burials on the existing part of the site that they currently lease from the council. And we felt it's important for there not to be 2 separate cemeteries operating next door to one another effectively. So there's a one-site philosophy that comes across in terms of the arrangement that we've been talking about with Dignity. They clearly, part of the agreement would be that they would prepare and submit the full detailed planning application at their own cost that again reflects the one-site philosophy. They would meet the costs of construction and delivery of the new site, linking the existing crematorium with the new cemetery site adjacent to it. That they would also provide for up to 25 public health funerals at no cost to the council. That the provision of the burial service will be available to the Basingstoke residents from April 2019. And Dignity will, again, in accordance with the one-site philosophy. The options for Basingstoke also to receive a share of the revenue associated with the burials on that site. And a clear statement from Dignity that the monumental masons and funeral directors would not be disadvantaged by this arrangement. One of the key things to stress also is that we've had a consultation event on the 24th of September. We invited 21 local funeral directors and monumental masons to an event to discuss the options that we were considering. And that was a really useful meeting with the representatives who attended. A lot of them have experience of working in other areas where Dignity provide the cemetery service on behalf of a local authority, and they said no concerns at all. It works really well for them. They wouldn't see a problem with it. It's just what the key things that they were keen to stress was it's important for the council to retain the control over the prices that are set, and that's been one of the fundamental things that we've been ensuring through any discussions with Dignity. So what's put forward is a proposal whereby we would enter into a lease agreement. There would be these key conditions as part of that, associated with the prices being set by the Borough Council, and those 4 key criteria that I've already talked around. But that's one of the key ones to ensure that we've got that control over the future. The only last thing just to mention, of course, just in terms of, again, through the lease arrangement, things like environmental liabilities would also be a key requirement for the lessees to control. So we talked about groundwater protection. Clearly, if there are enhanced requirements in the future for groundwater protection, that again would just fall to Dignity to manage. So open to questions.
But we have to have Councillor Westbrook first, and before he comes forward, just remind everybody that obviously we have some pink papers, so there is some confidential information which you can't refer to. If you absolutely feel you need to refer to it, you'll have to tell me, and we'll have to consider going into private session. So simpler if you can avoid it, but Councillor Westbrook.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Not too many things really, just a few questions really. The main reason for speaking is I was involved in the original CEP committee meeting when we discussed this, and also I'm a member who's got in my ward a couple of independent funeral providers. I think I'm correct in saying that some of the providers in the borough spoke about their concerns at that meeting actually, which I'm not sure was 2015 now probably. So my first question relates to page 26.9.1, which talks about the consultation event held in September with 21 other businesses invited. And Tom has just talked about that. It might be the way the question's written, but it says on there, and the way I read it anyway, as only representatives from 4 of the businesses attended, when I'm talking about masons and the like, stonemasons, was another event offered to those that didn't make it. The report notes that at the event, concerns were expressed about the importance of retaining control over the setting of fees for burials and the fees charged to monumental masons. It goes on to say that controls will be included within the lease. Can you expand on what's proposed, please, for inclusion in the lease to ensure that residents and local businesses won't be disadvantaged? At the original CEP meeting as well, I recall a debate in which as members we sought assurances that there would be public transport available to the proposed new cemetery for residents. I believe it was 7 days a week. Of course, at that time, there was a proposal for the new critical care hospital to be built nearby, which received planning permission, but regrettably, that project was cancelled. So on the transport theme, the hospital option is gone. The Manydown project isn't here yet, but I note that on page 26 under 8.3, it talks about a pilot community bus scheme as one of the options being considered for a period of 12 months with suitable monitoring and review. Is that a firm commitment that the service will run for 12 months as a minimum, irrespective of the usage during that period? And will they be able to offer the regularity and timetabling that residents can rely on? And the report also talks about a taxi car share scheme. Concerns were raised previously about this, and for me those concerns still remain. We're talking about bereaved residents being asked to share transport. Grief can often be a very private thing, and to me taxis and car sharing isn't the answer. Taxis and car sharing as well may well disadvantage residents with disability. My preference would be for a public bus service to serve what will be an important public facility.
Right. And do you want to comment on that, just in case there's a supplementary, and then we can...
Okay, so in terms of the meeting that we held at the council offices on the 24th of September, obviously we invited a significant number of those local funeral directors and monumental masons. The invitation letter did clearly say what we were considering in terms of delivery of the new site at North Waltham. So it said specifically we are considering the option to work in partnership with Dignity effectively. We can't really explain. I mean, none of them came back and said we can't make that date. Can you please provide us with another date, etc., or came back to us with any specific views to say we are not happy about this particular arrangement for these particular reasons. And as I say, what came across really clearly in that discussion we had was, and this is from organisations that work on in cemetery sites elsewhere, where Dignity deliver the service, but it's actually a council facility, if you like, is that they didn't have any major concerns about it, provided there is that control through the lease to ensure that the Borough Council sets those charges, and that's what we are very clear about. That is what is built into this potential lease arrangement, would be that control, so that we can ensure that they're not disadvantaged. Clearly, again, we circulated this paper to that whole group prior to this event as well, and obviously invited them to come along if they wish to make any comments during the committee. But obviously, none have turned up today. But you know, again, so we've engaged with those companies, and the views that we've had back really have been supportive of this particular approach. In terms of transport, that's something that we will be working on very heavily, if you like, over the next few months, in order to evaluate the best option moving forward. So this will be down to a portfolio holder decision in 2019, and as part of that we will engage with members again to say, these are the options that we've been considering, this is the information that we have, this is why we think this is the best option, and seek members' views about that prior to any decisions being made. It is an ongoing provision, so there's a £15,000 budget in place, ongoing budget to provide that public transport service moving into the future. You know, things will change, because at the moment, you know, when the site first operates, it's going to have relatively few visitors, but that's going to change over time. So you know, it's something that we're going to have to need to keep under review, and what we start with on day one may not be what we need in 5 or 6 years' time. So it's something we will need to keep under review.
Okay. Do you have a very quick supplementary? Or?
Yeah, just quickly, Chair. I think I wanted to pick up on the business to do with the landscaping side originally, which probably it talks about the mapping and that. But I think when we had the original CEP meeting with Tim Bosch, he came some time ago now. We did talk about landscaping being done at the early stages at that point, so that we could build up something, so that when it opens up, you know, there's something there that's, you know, looks half decent, not just a field. And I think that's probably 4 years ago. Well, it must be 4 years ago. And I wondered if anything had been done along that lines, or are we just waiting for these guys to come and start landscaping it now? Because it seems to me it's quite late, really, in the day.
Effectively, so the decision-making process for whether or not the council decide to work in partnership with Dignity, you know, it's heading for a cabinet meeting in January for a final decision on which way the council wishes to go. You know, clearly, if we end up with an arrangement with Dignity, they have expressed the views that they would do some early planting of some specimen plants to get that established as quickly as possible, and to carry out that landscaping work early on in the design phase in terms of the creation of the new cemetery. So there is a commitment by them to get that site looking good, if you like, as quickly as possible. What they also committed to do, you know, again, assuming that there would be the agreement to move forward, is to meet with members to share their designs in terms of landscaping at an early stage and prior to them submitting the full planning application. So again, that's something that we would look to bring forward in 2019.
Thank you very much. Right, it's questions, guys. Please, questions. Councillor Kim Taylor.
Sorry, Chair. I actually do have a question. It has two parts to it, and I'm afraid to tell you that one part of it is actually, I would have to refer to the pink papers.
Okay, well, can we keep that for the moment? We'll do all the questions that don't need to go into the pink papers, and then we'll come to that. Yep, okay. So you don't want to do the bit that... You have to do them in the order with the pink paper one first, do you? That's... Okay, fine, we'll do that. So, Councillor Jones.
Yeah. I've got a question in the pink when we get to that. But just a simple question: headstones. If option 3 is taken up, will people be able to buy their headstones outside of the burial, which is the people running it? Because that doesn't happen now in the crematorium bit, which I found.
Short answer is yes. I mean, again, that's that key consideration that monumental masons should not be disadvantaged. They you know, again, the fees will be set so that they're not disadvantaged. And yes, you could go to any funeral director or monumental mason to select what you wish to have.
And obviously, I know wave graves are done these days is a lot different to what they were years ago, so there'll be a stipulation on size and, you know, things like that. But that would we do that as a council, or would that be done by the Dignity or whatever they call themselves?
Dignity do have their own rules in terms of dimensions, maximum dimensions of headstones, etc. Again, you know, the monumental masons are used to working within those operating rules on any other site anyway, so it doesn't, you know, it's just silly things like, you know, it can't be 4 feet high. And
Yeah, very quickly.
They're not uniform is what I'm trying to get at. They're not going to be, I know you're going to have certain things, and I do accept that, but what I'm saying is some people want different things for different graves, as long as it conforms. You know, what I don't want to see is like a row of crosses, but you can get your cross from anywhere, if you see what I mean.
as far as I'm aware, it's literally just the overall dimensions. You know, there's no restrictions in terms of the design must be this, and there's no flexibility on that. So no.
Right. Any more questions not on the pink papers? Right, Councillor McCall.
Said a passing one on section 3.1, page 20, where it goes on about public health funerals. At the moment, are public health funerals cremations only, or do you get public health burials, and will that change under these arrangements?
So effectively at the moment, if for religious reasons that person needs to be cremated, then they'll be cremated. If they've expressed through associates or in any documentation that they wish to be cremated, they would be cremated. However, the general default position we have at the council is if they haven't expressed that wish and there's no other reason why they would be cremated or should be cremated, we would opt to bury them. That's the current sort of approach that we tend to follow at Basingstoke. So similarly, you know, in the future, if somebody says, I wish to be buried, they would be buried. So you know, the arrangement that's been discussed here with Dignity is very much they will provide a public health funeral, and it doesn't matter whether it's a burial or if it's a cremation. You know, they would obviously provide that.
Yeah, Councillor George.
Thank you, Chair. Well, a very simple question. I was looking at the lease period is going to be quite long, 105 years. Do we know how long it's likely that this plot's going to last into the future, before it becomes full and needs just regular maintenance? Thank you.
I'm led to believe it has enough capacity for over 100 years, so some time.
All right. Can I ask you a question, which I apologise I didn't ask you yesterday when you briefed me, because you've talked about the one-site philosophy, and do the financial arrangements, assuming it's in the white papers, not the pink papers, mean that it doesn't matter to us financially whether the burial is in the land currently used by Dignity or in our bit of it, that it's the same financially? You confirmed it is. That's it for questions not on the pink papers. So what I think we'll have to do is we'll have to go into private session, do the questions, and then we'll do any debate that needs to take place within the private session, and then we'll come back and do any debate that we can do without referring to the pink papers. So that's okay. I think that must be the best way of doing it, mustn't it? So now, it says here, to discuss confidential papers at a previously public meeting. Agree with members that the meeting is now to become confidential by passing the following motion. So the question is, do you agree to pass the following motion? That pursuant to section 100A4 of the Local Government Act 1972, the public be excluded from the remainder of the meeting on the ground that the public interest in maintaining the exemption outweighs the public interest in disclosing it, and therefore that exempt information is likely to be disclosed as defined in the appropriate paragraph of Schedule 12A of the Act. Now, do you want to pass that motion? Agreed? Okay. Now, in order to discuss the papers, the webcast will be turned off. So we have to pause while that is done. That has been done. Now, I have to ask members of the press or public to leave the room. I believe I don't have to ask visiting councillors to leave the room. So, but perhaps I could ask the visiting councillor to shut the door just to be on the safe side for us. Thank you. and committee admin has switched off the webcast. Yes, that comes twice, but there we are. Okay, so I think we're now back being webcast. Hello, those of you who are watching and wondered why you couldn't see anything for the last few minutes. We've been discussing the confidential bits in private. And I'm just checking exactly what we are being asked as the views of the committee are sought on. The options and recommendation to enter into release and management agreement with Dignity for cemetery provision. So in private session, we agreed that the majority of the committee supported the recommended option, option 3. Is there anything else people want to say about the bits on the white papers that they want clarified or assurances on? I think we got very clear answers actually, Councillor Taylor, to your question, which is we don't always get, but we did tonight. Councillor Jones.
We make sure when they talk about premium burials that normal burials are on. It's open every day when the burial site is open, sort of thing. Does that make sense? So
Yes,
it's not.
yeah.
So you can only.
Nope.
So cheap ones are Monday and Tuesday. Dear ones are. I don't want that sort of thing to happen. Yeah, it's fine.
Yeah, I think that was made clear, and presumably you'll get that in the lease. So it's yeah. Anything else, or is that it? Thank you very much, portfolio holder and officers. So very briefly, committee, the last item, work programme. So December, we have 2 items on the work programme, the Be Love review, which we asked for, and Horizon 2050. After tonight's debate on 2050, I shall look forward to that one. So it's we'll see what that brings for us. In January, we've got the Serco update. So this is our chance to meet the new waste contract providers and hear face-to-face how they're hoping to provide an improved service. Can CCG Scoping Group, which we put you in charge of, is that going to be ready to say something to us in January?
I had a meeting with the officer just before tonight's meeting, and we've agreed that a timetable will be sent out for a series of meetings before the end of November, and with meetings in December. So I would hope we could say something before.
Excellent, thank you. So we'll keep that on then. Neighbourhood management update we've asked for. Councillor Westbrook's gone. Subject close to his heart, so we'll look at that. Over the page, we've got air quality, which I've said before was down for January, but someone else has pointed out to me that although it's been January in these minutes, the master work programme that all officers are working to has had it down as March for some time. So I'm afraid officers are working to March on that one. So that one, as we don't want 4 items in January anyway, I'm proposing that we move that one to March, which is where it is on the programme that officers are working to. And then we've got the homelessness update for March. So that will be it for this municipal year. That's the word I'm looking for, as far as we know. Okay, so thank you very much. That meeting closed at 20:56. Councillor McCormick. Spoil it. I said I was hoping to finish by 9 tonight.
Well, it's a simple question. Not on. Well, 2 things that are not on here. Is it not time we had an update on modern slavery and the ice rink is another one, because the Ice Users Forum had a public meeting which Councillor Kim Taylor attended. Those 2 particularly, the ice rink in particular, notable by its absence from this document.
Okay, if you're okay, I'll ask Sadie to put in the minutes that I will review the position, because I haven't got all my detailed papers, and look at that and either add them to the to be timetabled or suggest when they could be timetabled. If that's okay, I'll do that if it's in the minutes. Thank you. Okay, thank you very much. Now closing it again at 8:57.